It is the spring of 1991, and Eddie Jordan is sitting in a converted carpet warehouse in Silverstone, looking at a bank statement that should make the decision he is about to make impossible. His new Formula One team has a budget that independent paddock estimates place at a fraction of what Ferrari, McLaren, or Williams are spending in the same season, figures that several contemporary reports suggest were less than one-tenth of the budgets operated by the sport's established frontrunners. He has no major manufacturer engine deal. He has no title sponsor commitment that extends beyond a handful of races. What he has is a car that his small design team, led by a young engineer named Gary Anderson, has just unveiled, and the car is, by the unanimous and slightly disbelieving assessment of every journalist and rival engineer who sees it at the launch, one of the most aesthetically resolved and aerodynamically coherent Formula One cars anyone in the paddock has seen in years. A team with almost no money has produced a car that looks like it belongs to a manufacturer with 10 times its resources. By the time you understand how Gary Anderson achieved that and what happened to the team and the car across one extraordinary chaotic season, you will understand why the Jordan 19-1 remains, more than 3 decades later, the benchmark against which every subsequent small team Formula One car has been measured, and why the season that made it famous nearly destroyed the team that built it. This is the story of the Jordan 19-1, the car that gave Michael Schumacher his Formula One debut, the car that finished fifth in the Constructors' Championship on a budget that should not have produced a competitive car at all, and the engine deal at the end of the season that took everything the team had built and very nearly walked away with it. To understand the 901, you need to understand the specific constraints Gary Anderson was working within. Eddie Jordan had founded the team after a successful career running junior formula teams, building a reputation for developing driver talent and operating with a financial discipline that came from genuine necessity rather than choice. The step up to Formula One in 1991 was funded through a combination of sponsorship, personal financial commitment from Jordan himself, and a customer engine supply from Ford. The Cosworth-built HBV8, an engine that was competitive but not cutting edge, available to multiple teams across the grid rather than developed exclusively for Jordan's use. Anderson's design brief was, in effect, defined by what the team could not afford rather than by an open engineering remit. There was no budget for the kind of exotic materials and manufacturing processes that front-running teams used routinely. There was no wind tunnel of the team's own. Aerodynamic development relied on time purchased at external facilities, carefully rationed across a limited testing budget. What Anderson had was his own design judgment, a small team of dedicated engineers, and the specific freedom that comes from not having layers of corporate decision-making slowing down every design choice. The 19-1's visual identity, the car that every observer at its launch identified immediately as something unusual, emerged from decisions that were as much aerodynamic necessity as aesthetic preference. The car's side pods were sculpted with a sweeping organic curvature that differed sharply from the boxier, more angular side pod designs that most rivals were running. Anderson's reasoning was rooted in airflow management rather than visual design for its own sake. The curved surfaces were intended to manage the airflow around the car's midsection more efficiently, directing air toward the rear aerodynamic surfaces with less turbulent disruption than flatter panel surfaces produced. The car's green and blue livery, sponsored by 7 Up, became inseparable from the design's reputation, but the underlying shape beneath the paint was the product of a small team working with limited wind tunnel access and compensating through careful, iterative refinement of a smaller number of design concepts rather than the broad parallel development programs that larger teams could fund. The car's debut at the United States Grand Prix in Phoenix in March 1991 produced an immediate signal that Jordan's resource constraints had not produced the uncompetitive machinery the budget figures might have predicted. Andrea de Cesaris qualified the 19-1 in a position that exceeded the team's own internal expectations, and the car's race pace across the opening rounds of the season demonstrated a combination of straight-line efficiency and cornering balance that began attracting attention from rival technical directors who had, before the season began, paid the new team little attention. De Cesaris would go on to finish fourth at the Canadian Grand Prix in June, a result that, for a team with Jordan's resources, represented a points finish achieved against cars with engineering and financial resources many multiples larger. Stay with this, because what happened at the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps in August 1991 is the moment that connects the Jordan 19-1 permanently to the broader history of the sport. Jordan's regular driver, Bertrand Guichot, had been involved in a legal incident in London earlier in the year and was unavailable for the race, sentenced to a period of imprisonment that removed him from the team's lineup with essentially no notice. Eddie Jordan needed a replacement driver immediately, and the recommendation that reached him from Mercedes sports car program management, who had been monitoring a young German driver competing in sports car racing, was Michael Schumacher. Schumacher had never driven a Formula One car in competitive conditions before that weekend. He completed a limited number of laps in a test session in the days before the race, then qualified the 19-1 in seventh position ahead of several established Formula One drivers in superior machinery in a car he had driven for the first time only days earlier. He retired from the race itself with a clutch failure on the opening lap, but the qualifying performance was sufficient to establish, immediately and unambiguously, that Formula One had just witnessed the debut of a driver of exceptional ability. What followed is the part of the Jordan 19-1 story that the team's small scale made almost inevitable, and that the sport's competitive structure made almost predatory. Benetton, a team with substantially greater resources and an existing relationship with Ford's engine program, approached Schumacher immediately after his Spa performance and signed him for the remainder of the 1991 season, a move whose legal and contractual legitimacy Jordan disputed vigorously at the time, arguing that the team held an option on Schumacher's services for the following race that Benetton had circumvented. The dispute was never resolved in Jordan's favor in any way that returned the driver to the team. Schumacher never raced for Jordan again. The car that had given him his debut, and the team that had taken the risk of fielding an untested driver in a car they had spent their entire limited budget developing, lost the single most valuable asset the weekend had produced within days of producing it. The second blow arrived at the season's conclusion and struck the team's competitive foundation more directly than the loss of a single driver, however exceptional. Jordan's relationship with Ford, who had supplied the Cosworth HB engines that powered the 191 to its fifth-place Constructors' Championship finish, deteriorated over a dispute regarding the terms and exclusivity of the following season's engine supply. Ford elected to supply their newer, more powerful HBA spec engine to Benetton on an exclusive basis for 1992, leaving Jordan with an older specification engine that placed the team at a significant performance disadvantage relative to the team that had, only months earlier, also taken their breakout driver. The team that finished 1991 with genuine momentum, a top five constructors finish, a car that had become an aesthetic and engineering reference point across the paddock, and a driver discovery that the entire sport was now discussing, entered 1992 with neither the engine package nor the driver that had made the previous season's achievement possible. The 19-2 that followed in 1992, powered by the Yamaha V12 engine that Jordan secured as a replacement supply, was competitive in isolated sessions but lacked the reliability and overall package coherence that had made the 19-1 such a complete car relative to its resources. The team's constructors' championship position fell from fifth to a position outside the points-paying ranks entirely. The specific combination of circumstances that had produced the 19-1 success, Anderson's design talent operating within tight constraints, a competitive customer engine package, and a driver lineup that, even before Schumacher's brief appearance, had been performing above the team's resource level, proved difficult to reassemble in the seasons that followed. Even as Jordan continued operating in Formula One for over a decade afterward and would eventually win races outright before the team's ownership changed in the mid-2000s. Gary Anderson's design work on the 1901 established a reputation that carried him through a long subsequent career in Formula One technical roles, including spells at Jordan's later cars and at other teams, but the 1901 remained in the assessment of the engineers and journalists who covered it both at the time and in retrospective analysis published in subsequent decades, the clearest demonstration of what a small, resource-constrained design team could achieve when design judgment and aerodynamic intuition compensated for the absence of the manufacturing and testing resources that larger operations took for granted. The car's livery, its shape, and its place in motorsport history as the car of Schumacher's debut have made it one of the most recognized Formula One chassis of the entire 1990s, disproportionate to the single top five constructors finish that represents its only tangible championship achievement. At Spa-Francorchamps in August 1991, a car built by a team with almost no money carried a driver who had never raced in Formula One before to a qualifying position that embarrassed teams spending many times what Jordan could afford. Within days, the driver was gone. Within months, the engine deal that had made the car possible was gone too. What remained was the car itself, a design that more than 3 decades later still appears on lists of the most beautiful Formula One cars ever built, produced by a team that proved for one season that engineering judgment and aerodynamic coherence could come from a converted carpet warehouse in Silverstone just as completely as from a manufacturer's purpose-built campus. If this is the kind of engineering history that brought you here, subscribe. It keeps this channel producing the stories behind the cars that the championship tables don't fully explain. Leave a comment. Do you think Jordan was treated unfairly over the Schumacher situation, or was it simply the competitive reality of a sport where bigger teams take what smaller teams discover? Next time, we go inside the season where every team on the grid fought a physics problem that nobody had fully anticipated, and the cars that solved it first won the championship before the season had properly begun.